All right, well, thank you all for coming. This is not mine, this is the next presenter's. I'll just be reading off my paper. But thank you all for being here. The title of my paper is The Open Society and Its Ethics, a Puzzle. And this paper will be primarily interacting with Gerald Gauss's theory of the open society in his book, The Open Society and Its Complexities. So I'll just go ahead and get started. Introduction. Every political theory rests on a sliding scale from anarchism to totalitarianism. Every political theory also rests on foundational assumptions in ethics, metaphysics, and epistemology, and those assumptions influence how that theory prescribes public policy decisions. In the context of the United States, its governance rests closer on the scale to anarchism. Given the expansive freedom that exists in the US, political theorists and political philosophers existing in that context develop their theories around that fact, often treating expansive freedom as a goal or ideal to be maintained and expanded further. However, existential shocks to the political order often influence people to reevaluate their positions. Advancements in artificial intelligence, hereafter AI, have led people to re-examine their position on government involvement in tech markets. Do there exist more fundamental side constraints on liberty, or is a certain conception of liberty and equality the fundamental side constraint? One important thinker who has taken up questions and phenomena like these is the recently deceased Gerald Gauss. Gauss was a liberal political theorist in the Rawlsian tradition. His chief concern in his work was to ask how reasonable people who disagree can live well together. Gauss thought the society which best provides the answer to that question is the open society. The open society as a term was coined by Karl Popper in the late 20th century. Karl Popper identified the open society with liberal democracy and defended it against the totalitarian ideologies of his day. Contemporary of Popper, F.A. Hayek, also defended the open society, what he called the Great Society. However, Hayek was much more pessimistic than Popper about its feasibility. He thought human nature was unfit for the open society. Furthermore, he was concerned not to identify the open society with liberal democracy because of his worry that the majority would tyrannize the minority. Gauss's unique contribution to the literature on the open society is to extend Hayek's analysis, answering Hayek's skepticism with the latest evolutionary models and theories of complex systems. However, Gauss's analysis of what the open society is and his application of evolutionary models and complex systems theory to the open society has some ambiguities. Based on how one interprets those ambiguities, various problems arise. Gauss's proposal may not be able to accommodate the need for AI regulation. Furthermore, Gauss's proposal faces epistemological problems. This paper will exegete Gauss's conception of the open society and then formulate a critique. Gauss argues that the open society has three characteristics: autocatalytic diversity, unbounded technological innovation, and individual autonomy. However, Gauss is ambiguous as to whether these characteristics are descriptive or prescriptive. If the characteristics are prescriptive, Gauss is also ambiguous as to whether these characteristics are absolute or invariant or degreed. If they're absolute, then the characteristics appear to be morally and practically infeasible, since there is empirical evidence that AI has been used to undermine individual autonomy by undermining a person's rights to privacy, consent, and true information. If they are degreed, Gauss's understanding for how social moral rules are produced is deficient. It disconnects justification from truth and potentially devolves into a vicious circle. So in section 1, I'll exegete Gauss's book. In section 2, I will critique. So section 1, the open society as self-organizing. Gauss analyzes the open society, arguing that the open society has three characteristics: autocatalytic diversity, unbounded technological innovation, and individual autonomy. So autocatalytic diversity is diversity that creates more diversity. It's self-perpetuating. Unbounded technological innovation derives from Stuart Kauffman's indefiniteness principle of functional searches. So in essence, the principle states that the development of a new technology creates a potentially infinite number of unknown effects because that technology provides the basis for a potentially infinite number of further technological developments or a potentially infinite number of performable functions utilizing the new technology. And he gives examples with like a screwdriver. You can use a screwdriver to fix a car. You can use a screwdriver to stab someone in the eye, things like that. Individual autonomy is a claim about the agents that compose the open society. Each agent in the open society has natural liberty, which is the absence of interference required to pursue their own life plans within certain boundaries. Gauss further analyzes the open society based on evolutionary models and theories of complex systems. Said earlier, he conceives of it as a self-organizing complex system. Self-organization is the evolutionary analog to a spontaneous order in economics. And self-organization in biological evolution is a dynamic, indeterminate process where order emerges from disorder. Local interactions of many parts in a disordered system give rise to global regularity and behavior. Agents achieve order by engaging in repeated reconciliation coordination games akin to what game theorists call a stag hunt. So in a stag hunt, two agents cooperate to hunt a stag. Both agents are required to contribute, and each will cooperate only if he trusts the other to pull his weight. However, agents must internalize certain social norms, such as no cheating, self-control, for example. Without an internalization of such norms, agents are disincentivized to cooperate and reconcile. This process occurs with no external interference. The process is purely internal to agent interaction, producing a common morality by means of disagreement and reflexivity to others. The boundaries of natural liberty in the open society derive from social moral rules that are publicly justified. Natural liberty is the presumed permission to do some action fey in the absence of a rule not to do some action fey. Social moral rules have the purpose of providing shared expectations. Shared expectations have three components: what someone will do, the empirical; what someone ought to do, the normative; and the motivation to self-sacrifice for rules or expectations even when they do not benefit the agent, so a duty. And I will explain public justification in a moment. The boundaries of natural liberty are open to revision though. Gauss seems to conceive of autocatalytic diversity, unbounded technological innovation, and individual autonomy as the fundamental goal of the open society, with the boundaries providing expectations that make achieving those goals possible. However, at times he also speaks of social moral rules and the characteristics of the open society as mutually fundamental or mutually feeding into each other. So it's kind of unclear, but it seems that he thinks that the moral rules provide preconditions for cooperation, and then cooperation is what makes the open society possible. Public justification is a term from the public reason liberalism literature in political philosophy. Gauss endorses two versions of public justification. The first he dubs minimal justification, and that involves merely coherence of one's normative commitments with specific social moral rules under consideration. Questions of truth and well-grounded beliefs don't enter the equation. The second he dubs robust justification, and robust justification involves a large number of people critically interrogating their normative beliefs to see if they would give them reason to endorse the social moral rule under consideration. So this would involve a lot more deliberation. In other words, an agent needs a reason from her own perspective to endorse a rule, and that agent should be willing to further interrogate her normative commitments to see if those commitments do or do not align with the rule. Gauss creates three models to show how agents who disagree but value cooperation and shared expectations can achieve a common social morality. Each model relies on idealized agents who are perfectly free and equal, moral and rational. The notion of a reasonable person is a fundamental category or assumption in the Rawlsian tradition. Only reasonable people who enter the original position behind a veil of ignorance can choose the conditions which create the justice as fairness society. Little explanation is often given as to what a reasonable person is, and they also recognize that many real-life citizens are unreasonable as they understand unreasonableness, and so they usually strongly idealize their agents, although there are attempts to kind of more moderately idealize. How does public justification relate to a diverse population which includes agents who endorse some version of moral realism? What if citizens think that rules should be based on objective truth? Gauss considers this problem, and the solution he adopts is that people can have moralities that they think of as objective, so long as they don't hold people who disagree with their morality accountable. So as long as morality remains private, it's not a public affair, you can believe in moral realism, but the only rules sufficient for accountability are those that are publicly justified. And so section 2, I'll provide the critique. So based on what we've seen so far from Gauss's book, we can kind of summarize the open society in a proposition. P1, the open society is a self-organized complex system characterized by autocatalytic diversity, unbounded technological innovation, and individual autonomy. But take note of that term characterized. It's ambiguous between a descriptive interpretation and a prescriptive one. That ambiguity gets worse when you start thinking about how Gauss models the open society as a self-organized complex system, because that's a term drawn from evolutionary theory, and so you would think it would be descriptive. It's a fact like gravity and the second law of thermodynamics. It can't be changed, we just have to accommodate it. And he makes a bunch of statements to that effect. I won't get into here. But if we take the descriptive interpretation, Gauss seems to face a problem. It doesn't seem to be coherent given what he says in other places. In other places, he seems to think that the open society is a goal that we should be striving towards. But what coherence does it say that we should have more gravity. I mean, if it's a descriptive fact that we just need to accommodate ourselves to, then it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to say that we need more of it. It's something that we have to accommodate, but it's not something that we should strive for more of. This also highlights a further problem with kind of modeling the open society as an evolutionary system when you also have agents in the picture, because there's a fundamental dissimilarity between agents and biological evolutionary systems. Agents are the kinds of beings that bring about irreducible causal effects in the world, and we think people that we attribute moral responsibility for, but gravity's not like that. I mean, on your preferred metaphysics, gravity could be a kind of causal power, but it's not something we attribute moral responsibility to. If gravity figures into the explanation for bringing down a bridge, we don't say gravity is blameworthy for bringing down a bridge and killing people. We just say that it happened. So if the descriptive reading of Gauss is implausible, we should use the principle of charity and say it's the prescriptive interpretation. So that would refine our proposition, and we'll say the open society is a self-organized complex system with the values of autocatalytic diversity, unbounded technological innovation, and individual autonomy, with the goal of pursuing and protecting those values. But we still have further ambiguities now to deal with. Are these goals and values absolute, or in other words, invariant, or are they degreed? Again, we have conflicting textual evidence. Suppose the absolute interpretation is taken. Gauss faces the charge that the open society is morally and practically infeasible. Invariant individual autonomy is infeasible to achieve when paired with invariant unbounded technological innovation. And that claim requires no theoretical postulates. We have empirical evidence. And this is where we'll look at AI here. We have some empirical evidence that shows that AI has been used to undermine individual autonomy by undermining persons' rights to privacy, consent, and true information. For example, DeepMind in the UK used its AI to collaborate with hospitals to access and analyze patient data without their consent. When their activity was discovered, they faced backlash and legal action. Another example involves AI synthesizing health data from fitness trackers of soldiers, and some of those soldiers were on private, they were covert military bases. That data got leaked and it exposed the locations of those covert military bases. So when we look at the empirical examples of AI, it reveals a tension between two values of the open society: unbounded technological innovation and individual autonomy. The one, unbounded technological innovation, appears to undermine the other. So if there's an empirical conflict between the two, then we might generalize out and we might say that the open society's moral and practical feasibility is implausible. Suppose we take the degreed interpretation. Gauss faces the charge that his model for how the social moral rules are produced that constrain the open society's values is a vicious circle. So I'll quote Gauss as follows. Quote, highly diverse moral agents can converge on a common morality without any collective agreement or informational restrictions on what they know about their moral views. A contract, bargain, or central authority is not in principle needed to adjudicate the dispute. Self-organization, this is the important part, self-organization can thus be recursive. It can create the rules that regulate further self-organization. This is a fundamental result. Not only is a social morality required to structure the process of self-organization, but that very morality itself can be the result of self-organization. But that analysis, as an analysis, regardless of what you think about the empirical evolutionary things of it, as an analysis, that leaves us with a vicious circle. Social moral norms are necessary for the open society to self-organize, but it's self-organization which produces the social moral rules. These challenges aren't insuperable, but there are further difficulties that he faces, epistemological ones. If self-organization, a purely descriptive process, creates social morality, how can it be known that the social moral rules produced are true, good, and just? The knowledge of the truth or falsity of social moral rules cannot derive from public justification because, as we noted earlier, Gauss disconnects justification from truth. And they can't also derive, the knowledge can't derive from objective moral facts because Gauss thinks that objective moral facts are insufficient for accountability in a society. So it seems like he lacks an account of how it can be known that the social morality produced by self-organization is just. Gauss often appeals to the functionality of morality, and that functionality is itself a part of justice. But he says that morality can't be reduced to functionality. But it seems like because he's bracketed truth and objective morality, it's unclear as to what besides functionality he could appeal to when evaluating moral rules. But then that produces a further question of why we should value social cooperation in the first place, but beyond just functional reasons, that it like helps us achieve whatever we want to achieve. In addition, by modeling the open society as a kind of spontaneous order, Gauss inherits the problems that come with spontaneous order theory in economics. One such problem was articulated well by Walter J. Schultz in his 2001 book, The Moral Conditions of Economic Efficiency. Schultz argues that spontaneous order theorists fail to distinguish between different types of social situations. They conflate coordination games such as stag hunts with moral rules such as protecting property rights. According to Schultz, there are 4 possible types of social situations, with only 2 being relevant for our purposes. The first one is at least one of each agent's preferences coordinates and each agent's strategy, best strategy coordinates with each other agent's best strategy. The second one is at least one of each agent's preferences coordinates, but each agent's best strategy conflicts with every other agent's best strategy. The first Schultz calls a coordination situation, and the second he calls a collective action situation. Stag hunts cannot convert collective action situations into a coordination situation. Moral rules can. Furthermore, rules are not strategies like stag hunts because rules govern which strategies are permissible given a set of possible options. Thus, it is illegitimate to conflate the 2 classes of social situations. So as I conclude, I'll point some ways forward for how those who are attracted to the open society could defend it and maybe seek to improve on Gauss's model. I think an adequate defense of the open society will need to recognize 3 important truths. 1, epistemology cannot be separated from ethics and political theory. So if truth is an epistemic value, then what is true will necessarily bear on political questions. 2, the open society requires more fundamental values, which normatively constrain autocatalytic diversity, unbounded technological innovation, and individual autonomy. And then 3, a spontaneous order model of the open society is inadequate. If the open society is a coordination situation, in Schultz's sense of the term, normative constraints are necessary so that agents can hold each other accountable. These normative constraints should be based on epistemically true beliefs and objective moral values, which means that public justification is neither necessary nor sufficient. Thank you.